I had always believed that life had settled into a peaceful rhythm for me. I had married into a family of means, and from the outside, it seemed like the perfect picture of contentment. My life with Mason was far from perfect, but it had felt like a comfortable routine, until that night in the hotel lobby, when his mocking tone shattered the tranquility I had carefully built. Mason, with his usual sharpness, sat across from me, grinning as he bragged about his life. His latest announcement caught me off guard. He had married someone new, a woman whose father was none other than the president of Goldsmith Enterprises. His words were laced with pride, and the laughter in his voice made me feel small, though I tried my best not to show it. Goldsmith Enterprises, the name echoed in my mind, tugging at something familiar, yet elusive. For a moment, I couldn't place it, but then it hit me, the same company that had been the subject of my father's conversations over the years. They were one of our largest competitors in the real estate market, a powerful name I had heard too many times to ignore. As Mason continued to gloat, blissfully unaware of the realization I had just made, I found myself suddenly amused by the irony of the situation. Here he was, boasting about his new wife and her powerful connections, while I, a woman from a family entrenched in wealth and business, was the one who knew the true weight of those connections. I am Patricia, 37 years old, and, despite what Mason seemed to think, I had built my life not on my father's influence, but on a carefully laid path of responsibility and quiet ambition. I had married Mason in my late 20s, after a brief and relatively uncomplicated courtship. He had come into my life in a way that felt destined, a friend of a friend whose moving company helped my friend relocate. It was only after she turned him down that we began to get to know one another. Mason's easygoing nature was a stark contrast to my often meticulous and driven demeanor. And somehow, it worked. We complemented each other in ways I didn't fully understand then, but I knew I had found someone I could trust and rely on. We married quietly, surrounded by a few close friends and family, and life seemed to fall into place. I worked in my family's real estate business, handling much of the administrative side while my father, the president, focused on strategy and decision-making. As the only child, I was expected to eventually step into his role. Though I never quite embraced the weight of that expectation, I found balance in the life I led with Mason, keeping my personal ambitions and professional responsibilities closely guarded. Mason, on the other hand, had completed high school and worked for a moving company. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it was a respectable one. I admired his hard work, though I rarely spoke about my own education or future within the company. I didn't want to make him feel inadequate. I saw his job as demanding. And though it wasn't high-powered in the way my family's business was, it was one he took pride in. Our relationship remained strong, grounded in mutual respect, and for the most part, we found happiness together. But the cracks began to appear after a year of marriage. It started one evening, as we lay in bed, when Mason unexpectedly broached the subject of children. The tone in his voice was unusual, thick with irritation, and I could sense his frustration before he even spoke. It was a topic I had thought about, too, but hadn't anticipated coming up so soon. It's only been a year, there's no rush, I replied gently, not wanting to add pressure where there need not be any. I had always believed that when the time was right, it would happen naturally, but Mason wasn't so patient. He started quoting statistics, his voice rising as he mentioned the 90% chance of conception within a year for couples not using contraception. The number sounded high, almost absurd to me. I had never been one for statistics or the science of it all. If you're concerned, maybe we should both get tested, I suggested, hoping a joint effort might bring clarity. But instead of understanding, Mason became defensive. What are you implying? He shot back, his voice tinged with contempt. That it's my fault? Usually, it's the woman's fault. The accusation stung. I hadn't blamed him, nor had I suggested anything of the sort, but his defensiveness grew. He continued, it's definitely the woman's fault, as though the words were an accusation directed squarely at me. I could feel my heart race, but I remained silent, too shocked to respond properly. I had only offered a reasonable solution, but Mason had twisted it into something more, something hurtful. Of course, I replied, my voice trembling with a mix of confusion and frustration. So just you get tested, I'm too busy with work. His eyes flashed with anger. I have a job too, you know. You're just coasting along in your dad's company, he snapped. Those words cut deeper than anything he had ever said. I had never coasted through life. My role may not have been flashy, but I worked hard, learning from my father and preparing for a future I had not yet fully embraced. But Mason's words felt like an accusation of all that I had quietly worked for and built. That night, we fell into a heavy silence. The weight of his words lingered between us as we turned our backs to each other in bed. Sleep was elusive, the air thick with tension. I could feel the strain of the conversation reverberating in my mind. What had started as a simple discussion about children had morphed into something far more complicated, something neither of us had prepared for. The moment Mason entered the lobby, my heart skipped a beat. He wasn't alone. A young woman, no more than in her early 20s, was on his arm. She was striking, tall, with flawless porcelain skin, bold makeup, and bright red nails that seemed out of place in the chilly northeastern weather. Her outfit was even more jarring, a short skirt, despite the cold air biting through the lobby's glass doors. I couldn't take my eyes off them, my mind racing in disbelief as they walked in, laughing and talking in a way that felt foreign to me. I stood frozen for a moment, trying to process the sight before I blurted out, "Why are you here, and who is she?" The words came out before I could stop them, my curiosity overpowering the part of me that was hesitant to know the answer. Mason turned toward me with a grin that was unfamiliar, one I hadn't seen in years. There was something different in his demeanor, almost giddy, like a child with a new toy. "Oh, let me introduce you," he said, a hint of excitement in his voice. "This is Diana, my new wife. We're on our honeymoon. And guess what? She's the daughter of a wealthy businessman." The name Diana hit me like a wave, and I immediately felt a pang of discomfort. She was the same Diana from the phone call months ago, the one whose name had been dropped with an air of pride. A wave of unease washed over me as I took in her youthful beauty, contrasting sharply with the pride Mason seemed to wear like a badge of honor, marrying someone so much younger and wealthier. "You're here alone? That's sad," Mason sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Diana, standing beside him, gave me a cursory glance before eyeing me with a smirk that was anything but friendly. "Hey, Mason, is this your ex-wife?" she said, her tone cutting. "She looks old. Hurry up with the check-in." Her words hit harder than I expected, but I refused to show it. I held my ground, though my composure was slipping. Mason casually draped an arm around her shoulders, as though trying to rub it in. "Yeah, I'm set for life now, marrying into money," he boasted. "You keep struggling in your modest life." His laugh, sharp and grating, rang through the quiet lobby like a discordant note, shattering the calm that had been enveloping me just moments before. He was flaunting his new life, his new wife, and everything that came with it. I stood there, seething quietly, trying to maintain control of my emotions. "Yeah, Diana is Goldsmith's daughter, you know, Goldsmith Enterprises," he continued, practically glowing with pride. The mention of Goldsmith Enterprises was enough to make me pause. The name resonated in the back of my mind, and suddenly, it clicked. The company was familiar. It was a name I had heard more than once in my father's business dealings. My family's real estate empire had crossed paths with Goldsmith Enterprises more than a few times. Mason's gloating was suddenly starting to feel like more than just harmless bragging, it felt like a pointed jab. The realization hit me just as Mason's face lit up even more, like a kid showing off a shiny new toy. "Impressive, huh? Her family's loaded," he said. "They even paid off our house mortgage quickly. Thanks for making the divorce easy, Patricia," he added, his tone dripping with mockery. I didn't flinch. "Yeah, I know them," I replied calmly. "They're in that big building downtown, right?" "I've been there." Mason's eyes widened with surprise, and Diana raised an eyebrow. "Oh, you've been there," Mason said, looking almost stunned. "Well, her family owns a huge company, so breaking up with you was the right choice," he said, a malicious smirk curling on his lips. I nodded, keeping my voice steady. "That building? It's part of our real estate holdings," I said, as if recalling a trivial detail. Mason and Diana both blinked in confusion, and their skepticism was palpable. "What do you mean, our real estate?" they asked in unison. I didn't let their confusion unsettle me. "That building is rented by my father for his most prestigious office. I'm not sure if your company is involved in real estate, but it's certainly not a shabby building," I explained, my tone smooth and calm, like I was merely making a passing observation. Their reactions were immediate. Mason's face twisted in disbelief, and Diana looked at me like I had just pulled the rug out from under her. I could sense their discomfort, but I pressed on, knowing this was the moment to take control. "Yes, I know how grand it is. I was there when my father purchased that building for about $500 million recently. He was complaining about a tenant not paying their rent. Turns out, it was your company. In fact, my father is a real estate magnate with assets worth $5 billion, and that building is one of them. Goldsmith Enterprises has been the tenant for the past few months, and they haven't paid their rent, I revealed, watching their faces as the words sunk in. Diana's laughter erupted in disbelief, but the shock in her eyes told a different story. That can't be true. Our company's doing great, she scoffed, still laughing, but I could see the unease creeping into her gaze. Her laughter was an attempt to mask her discomfort, and it didn't fool me for a second. I didn't let their mockery derail me. I was beyond the point of letting them dismiss this casually. Diana's loud claims about their company's success seemed desperate, and I knew I needed proof to shut down the denial they were clinging to. Without missing a beat, I pulled out my smartphone and dialed my father. "I'm here with the daughter of Goldsmith Enterprises," I told him, keeping my voice steady. "Can you send me a photo of the rent reminder notice?" Within moments, my father sent a clear image of the notice, 4 months of unpaid rent, addressed to Goldsmith Enterprises. I held the phone out for Mason and Diana to see, watching as their expressions shifted from smug confidence to something more uncertain. "See," I said, my voice even and calm, "if you don't pay soon, we might have to consider legal action. What are you going to do?" I watched as their faces drained of color, the weight of the reality I had just dropped on them settling in. Diana's earlier bravado evaporated, and Mason's cocky smirk faltered. There was no denying the truth now. The tables had turned, and it was my turn to be in control.